Hi guys, welcome to the Classes Corner. I'm Kat, and this week and for the next 8 weeks I will be talking about the new BBC drama Troy, Fall of a City. It's created by David Farr, the writer of The Night Manager, and this first episode, Black Blood, is directed by Owen. The series chronicles the lives of the royal family of Troy at the beginning and throughout the conflict of the Trojan War. Now, straight away I do have to say that this series of videos I'm going to be making is going to be my opinion of the series as a series and how they use classics within the show. And I do have to say that not everyone will agree with me, both with my opinion on the series and how they use the classics. Because with classics and adaptations of classics, somehow, how the production team will use classics isn't necessarily black and white, accurate, non-accurate. Especially when it comes to depictions of the Trojan War. Now, obviously the big depiction of the Trojan War that we have in Western canon is the Iliad, and the Iliad is such an important book for me, it's such an important poem for me, because it's one of the first introductions to real classics that I got when I was about 16, reading it in my AS level classics class, and because I fell so much in love with the Iliad and the conflict within that poem, I actually went on to do classical civilizations at undergrad level, and then from my undergrad I went to do ancient narrative literature at masters. You know, classics is such an important part of my life, and a huge part of that is because of the Iliad. So that story and those characters are very precious to me. I'm actually really sort of about it, to the point where actually on this channel, my 50th episode, when I actually get there, will probably be on Troy, the film, because I have issues with that movie, and not going into that now. But the thing is with the Trojan War is that there are so many texts that deal with it outside of the Iliad. Actually, the Iliad is only one sort of incident in the Trojan War in the 9th year of the war, and this and Troy, Fall of a City, apparently, actually, quick thing, spoiler, I will be discussing spoilers of the series throughout my discussion in this episode and in future episodes, and even though I'm going to try not to spoil big plot points of the show, sometimes I'll probably be pretty open with them sometimes, so keep spoiler warning pretty eminent on all of these videos. But you know guys, if I spoil something from a myth that's nearly 3,000 years old and someone gets offended because I spoil the plot point of the series, that's a mythic point, then come on, that's a thing. So as I was saying, I'm just saying that when it comes to the myths involving the Trojan War, pretty much nearly every ancient writer that still exists has some sort of commentary on the Trojan War or some sort of discussion. Greek, Roman, writers from Asia Minor, they all have some different interpretation of it that can be thousands of years apart, and they contradict each other and they mess in. So there's no definitive version of the Trojan War. So I feel like when going straight into Fall of a City, that it's unfair to really sort of go at it from a purist standpoint, from saying like, oh well, this isn't accurate to the myth, or this isn't accurate to the myth, because A, they might be accurate to some other type of myth from some other text. You know, I haven't read the entire Western ancient canon of Greek, Roman and everything. You know, it's unlikely that anyone really has. I mean, some people might have, so they can comment, but for the most part, I'll be discussing what I can see with the classics and try and take it from the idea of what the production team is trying to do with this series. Also, at the end of the day, they are making a series for a modern audience, which does have its own limitations when it comes to storytelling. So even though I will keep an eye on the classics, just keep that in mind when it comes to the basic storytelling of the series. So the series starts off with the birth of Paris, the birth of Alexander, Prince of Troy, who will be Paris. And, you know, you see Hecuba giving birth to him, and you know, a young Cassandra having a dream of black blood seeping into the palace. So that immediately brings up some points of, we are very, very not in the Iliad territory. Like I said, the Iliad only covers a small incident in year 9 of the war. This is going into the real beginning of the Trojan conflict with Helen and Paris. So you see Paris being born, and then flash cut to about 20 years on, and he is being raised as not Alexander, Prince of Troy, but as a cowherd with his adoptive father. You see, Paris was, in the myth, Paris was abandoned as a baby because he was prophesied to be the cause of the fall of Troy. Now, this isn't in the Iliad, it's just some of it's mentioned in the Iliad, but so Paris is abandoned, he is raised as a cowherd. And from a classic standpoint, I really appreciated this because often the abandonment of Paris isn't really discussed in modern adaptations. And I did my master's dissertation on child abandonment in the ancient Greek novel, and the model of Paris, which is a baby abandoned for a prophecy, much like Oedipus was, being raised in a lower station, for example in Paris' case it's a cowherd, and then finding their way back to their original station, in this case as prince, was a big part of my dissertation. So seeing that represented, that made me quite happy straight away. So there we have that. Louis Hunter plays Paris, and his Paris is a little more rough around the edges than you might expect. The series really does go into the effects of him growing up outside of a royal household. He doesn't know basic royal etiquette, he's quite rough and tumble, he's quite, he's not princely. He's a young man who has suddenly been thrust into a royal environment, because what happens is that you do have the scene where he is picked to provide judgment over which goddess gets the golden apple. That is depicted with the goddesses of Aphrodite, Athena and Hera. One thing I really quite liked, they have a few details in this series which I actually really quite liked, little details that you might not really notice, is that Hera is cloaked in this wonderful sort of peacock cloak, which, considering the peacock is the animal of Hera, one of the animals of Hera, the other one is, another animal of Hera is a cow, and it's actually following a cow that's wandered off that Paris stumbles across the sort of judgment that he'll have to do. So I did appreciate that, the small details in there. So he, obviously the famous myth, Hera offers him power, Athena offers him admiration, that he'll be the most glorious man, and obviously Aphrodite promises him the most beautiful woman in the world. And obviously he picks Aphrodite. Now, what I found quite interesting in this interpretation of the Judgment of Paris is that both Hermes and Zeus are there at the proceedings. It seems that in some texts there's not really clear indication of why it's Paris that is chosen to make this judgment, but the fact that they put, the production team, the producers decided to, or the creators decided to put Zeus there, that saying that no, Paris has to be the one to make this judgment, and just really showing it as an idea of Zeus is to sort of, I feel like they're going along more of the lines of Hesiod, because in the Theogony, Hesiod, another, really ancient text, Hesiod sort of puts forward the idea that the Trojan War was caused by Zeus, because at that point there were too many heroes in the world. He's had too many kids, all the gods have had too many kids, there's too many demigods, there's too many great heroes going on, so they need to cause the Trojan War to sort of kill them off. So the fact that Zeus is really there at the proceedings of the Judgment of Paris, and he's like, nah, Paris is making this choice, he's picked Aphrodite, we're going with it, knowing that he's going to cause this conflict that will result in the Trojan War. So that really goes forward. Athena and Hera obviously react quite pettily, they're a bit of a tantrum, they have a bit of a scream, which I also find quite interesting. Some people might not like that sort of undignified actions by goddesses, but considering in the Iliad the gods are so petty, putting that across on screen, I appreciated that. Not other people might not, but I thought it was quite good. And then a little bit further, Paris rides off and he comes across the princes of Troy practicing for the city games, and he challenges them to a horse race, which if you read the Iliad, Paris is often associated with horses. He's a good rider, he's a good horseman, so he beats them, gets taken back to the city, is challenged by the other princes of Troy. He has a fight with Hector that Hector decimates him in. Hector, again, Hector is my favourite character in the Iliad, so he doesn't really get much characterization in this first episode. Hector doesn't. He's sort of just portrayed as the eldest prince. He doesn't really like Paris, which he doesn't really like him in the Iliad, but he doesn't really have that much to do. So he's portrayed by Tom Weston-Jones, and I will be keeping a close eye on Hector in the future. Note that for the upcoming episodes, but so far Hector really hasn't had much to do. He gets into a fight which is quite close to the representations of the Pancration. It's basically, there's biting, there's brawling, big fight between Hector and Paris. Hector wins far, incredibly far, you know, absolutely beats Paris. But Hecuba and Priam are watching the proceedings, and he sees Paris's birthmark from when he was a baby. That's not really a feature of the ancient text, but I suppose the creators needed a shorthand from how they recognised their son. Say, oh, it's a miracle, the gods have brought him back. You know, some of the priests and Cassandra are like, no, don't do that. You know, obviously not listened to, and Paris is brought into the royal household. And like I said, they really play up the fact that he hasn't been raised as a prince, that he doesn't understand, you know, he's been raised, not wild, but he's been raised throughout the constraints of the royal family. Now, in ancient literature, and I suppose in actually ancient history, sort of not underclass, common Greeks and common people of Troy and Asia Minor would have had a lot more freedom. So actually going into the royal palace is a constraint on Paris, and he doesn't know the etiquette, he doesn't know what really is going on. Some of it does feel a bit rushed. I will say I wish they had spent more time inside Troy in this episode, because Paris isn't, he's sort of there and then he's off again. I'll explain that in a minute. And so Priam explains to him that now, because he's a prince of Troy, he must do royal engagements, and he sends Paris, or Alexander as he's called by the royal family, off to Sparta to meet with Menelaus. You can tell where this is going. Again, I wish they had spent more time in Troy to sort of get the real feeling of the royal family, maybe develop Hecuba a little bit more, Cassandra a little bit more, Hector a little bit more. I do have to say that they downsized the Trojan royal family a bit. In the Iliad and in other texts, Priam has described as having 50 sons, 50 children or 50 sons, one of the two, and 14 or 15 of the which are Hecubes. So they downsized the royal family quite a bit. There's still a few brothers running around, but it's not that big. So when Alexander / Paris, he is sent off to Sparta to meet with Menelaus, Pandarus, another character from the Iliad, goes with him as sort of an advisor. Paris he tries his best, he tries to make an impression, but he's sort of still not very good. He states that he can't read. He sort of annoys Menelaus a little bit. Menelaus is portrayed quite well, I feel. I can't remember the actor's name, unfortunately, so I'm going to put it up here. Robin Hood. He's portrayed quite proudly. He is, he misses Mycenae. He is a Tiernonos in Sparta, which means he isn't the blood. He's married into the throne of Sparta through Helen. And what I quite liked is they actually portrayed Sparta as all fruit trees it is, all, very lush and spring, which actually Sparta's like. Often Sparta is portrayed as sort of a sandy area, but no, it's portrayed as sort of this lush, rich, fertile land, which, yay. So while they're there, they sort of explain why Troy is such an important city, because you get all the trade from Africa and Asia in through sort of the Asia Minor Straits to Greece. So this is how Greece gets lots of spices. It's a really strategic city, Troy. It's very important. Obviously, Paris falls in love with Helen. He sees her at first sight at this banquet. There's a bit of a dodgy line where he goes, so how did you two get together, to Menelaus and Helen, which is a bit modern. I think what the creators were trying to do with that line was just show how uncouth Paris is, that he just but whether or not that worked is up to you. He is introduced to Helen and Menelaus' daughter Hermione. Again, Hermione is remembered, which often Hermione isn't remembered by anyone. The fact that Helen had a daughter it really comes up in adaptation. So she's about 14, I think, which would make sense, because Helen's sister Clytemnestra's oldest daughter Iphigenia would be about the same age. Helen and Clytemnestra got married at the same time, so it makes sense they had daughters of similar marriageable age. So so Paris is sort of said like, oh well, Menelaus sort of introduces the idea that why Paris has been sent to Sparta is to broker a deal, an alliance with Sparta and Troy through the marriage of himself and Hermione, but obviously he has eyes for Helen and Helen alone. Helen is portrayed as very constrained with her husband, you know, a lot of passion there. She sort of gets high, sort of, you know, and she's obviously enthused by this young attractive man who's turned up and has eyes for her and is, you know, in that sort of way. Obviously Aphrodite probably has a bit of a thing involved there. I will get into that later with this one particular line that I really like. So obviously they, it's shown, you know, it's shown in the series that in this episode, Black Blood, that the reason why Menelaus leaves after a bit, he has a bit of an antagonistic relationship with Paris, but he leaves for a bit because it's portrayed that Atreus, him and Agamemnon's father, has died and he must leave for the funeral of his father, so that's why, you know, Menelaus is gone. Paris asks Helen to run away with him. She refuses initially, saying she has her daughter, she has her duty, you know, she can't run away with this wild, you know, this wild prince that isn't constrained by the royal customs because he's not been raised in them. But obviously at the end there's a, you know, a very big box is dropped off onto the Trojan ship, and we'll see how that goes in the second episode. Obviously Helen's in the box. So yes, that's the first, it's a rough synopsis of Black Blood, but here's the thing. So, you know, little classical touches that I liked. I quite liked the introduction of Hermione, like I said. The judgment of Paris was quite nice. One thing I absolutely loved, there was one line which I absolutely adored, which is after Paris and Helen have a sort of, they have a tryst, they have a sexual encounter together and they're lying together, and Helen just goes, "You have made me mad. I am overcome by madness. I love you." And you have made me mad. I love that, because in Greek poetry, in Roman poetry, in, you know, in Sappho, Catullus, Homer, you know, all the ancient tragedies, all, you know, Plato in the Phaedrus and the Timaeus, in the Symposium, love is a mania in ancient Greek. The ancient novels as well, there's this line of "You have made me mad." Now that I really liked, because it just because it might seem a bit hackneyed to a modern audience, but to me that line does show that the creators do care about the classics. You know, they care about telling this story using different sources. I mean, yeah, literally every ancient author uses Troy in a different way and uses Helen and Paris in a different way, you know. The Romans treated it differently, the Greeks treated it, different Greek states treated it differently. So the fact that the creators are trying to bring just like the little details of ancient Greek, proper ancient Greek feeling into this production really makes a difference. Obviously there are some things where people can, if you're an expert in ancient Greek clothing, you might have a problem with costumes. If you're an expert in ancient Greek friezes, you might have a problem with the depiction of the friezes in the show. But to me, what it comes down to is whether or not the creators actually care about the idea of the story they're telling. And it's important to, you know, trying to be faithful to the spirit of classical texts, of classical study. And that's what I find quite important. And the line, "You have made me mad," that really, I don't know, that might be a really specific thing to me because I deal so much with ancient romance, but that I really appreciated. One of the things that this series does quite well, at least in this first episode, I'll see how they continue through the rest of it, is sort of the sense of impending doom that's sort of pushed by fate, pushed by the gods to do with the Trojan War. one thing that was, that was quite prominent in this episode, which is also actually a feature of the Iliad, is that several times things are almost stopped. Like in the Iliad, the conflict is almost stopped several times. Both the conflict with Agamemnon and Achilles and the just Trojan War in general. Like someone could say something and it nearly stops. That the Trojans agree and the Greeks agree not to fight for this moment and let Paris and Menelaus duke it out. And they almost do that and the war almost stops. But then Aphrodite gets involved and then they make this other agreement and then Athena gets involved and then the war almost stops several times until something carries it going, keeps it going. And in this episode, sort of the meeting and sort of running off with Helen and Paris is almost stopped several times until it keeps going. Paris, when he first gets to Troy, they say, "I'll send him away again," and he's almost happy to do so because it's not his life as far as he's concerned. It's almost stopped. When he says, he says himself, "Oh, send me back." So his fate is almost stopped. When he's being sent to Sparta, Hector goes, "Oh, he's not ready, I'll go with him," which could have stopped the whole thing. It's nearly stopped. When he gets to Sparta, after Menelaus is gone, he's sort of not getting on quite well. He decides to leave, and then a storm stops him. And then when after Helen and him have their romantic scenes together, she initially turns him down, so she could have stopped there. So there's lots of these moments where it comes to, it's very much in keeping with the Iliad, where something goes and then nearly and then no. So I really did appreciate that as well. Okay, I'll see if that continues on throughout the series. So yeah, that's basically my initial things. I think it is sticking with the classics quite well. I do think that the creators do care about the Iliad. They care about, the tragedies, the Trojan women, the Andromache in it, we'll see how they fare with them, but they the Aeneid, the Roman part of it, they seem to care, at least with this first episode. Maybe not with complete accuracy, but we'll see how it goes. So far I'm optimistic with this first episode, and considering I went into this first episode looking to not like it, looking to criticize it, and I think that's quite an instinct when you care about something. When you see a representation of it, an adaptation, you're initially like, "Oh, how's this gonna go?" But I'm optimistic about the next 7 episodes. I do have some nitpicks, so here are my nitpicks. What are my nitpicks? I don't really like Paris with a beard. Personal preference there. Whatever. Louis Hunter looks fine in it. I just don't like Paris with a beard. Second, Paris calls himself a shepherd quite a few times. I'm like, you're a cowherd? Which in ancient Greek agrarian society, cowherds are way above shepherds in terms of the hierarchy, so why would you call yourself a shepherd? But again, that's a really weird nitpick. That's really specific to me. Cowherd, not shepherd. Second thing is, when they sort of have a bit of an interaction, Helen refers to the goddess, he's referring to the story of Actaeon, and Helen refers to the goddess Artemis as Diana when she's an ancient Greek woman, not a ancient Roman woman. I can sort of logic my way of why they made that choice to say Diana instead of Artemis, because the story of Actaeon, the main source of that myth we have in entirety is Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is a Roman text, so maybe that's just a reference to the fact that where we get that myth is quite Roman, so it is an ancient Greek myth as well, but where we as modern audiences are most likely to find it in its entirety is an Roman thing, so maybe that's why she calls it Diana. It would make more sense if Paris had called her Diana, because she's Trojan, where the Trojans are the forefounders of Rome, so it would make more sense on that side. But if that's a nitpick on that front. Are there any others? I don't think so. I think those are my very Paris with a beard, cowherd, Diana. Oh, one more. Oh yeah. Odysseus is mentioned. He sends gifts to Paris to welcome him to Greece, and he's referred to as a king. But Odysseus' father Laertes, who would be king of Ithaca, is still alive because he doesn't die until the end. He's sort of around until the end of the Odyssey. So Odysseus isn't a king, he's a prince. But minor nitpicks all around, I think. But again, that might be just Paris is the one to call him a king, so maybe that's just because he's uneducated. Don't know, we'll see. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on Troy Fall of City episode 1, Black Blood. If you guys have any other different thoughts, please comment down below on either the classics or how you're liking the series so far. You know, just episode 1. If you want to see more of these episodes, please like, share and subscribe, and I will see you next week with some more Troy. Bye.